Hi there YouTube, Musical Aviator here. Just pulling on to the Pacific Highway up near Chatswood, heading down south towards the city and across the Sydney Harbour Bridge. So in March 2021 I came up to Sydney just to see my parents and a few other friends. I was up here for 7 days. It's good to get the opportunity to come back up to Sydney since I was born in Sydney. I lived in Sydney for 25 years before I moved to Melbourne. Now, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, the borders were essentially shut for nearly 12 months. So it's been 12 months since I saw my parents or any of my Sydney friends as we pass through a yellow light there. Anyway, I was up in Sydney for 7 days and it was a very pleasant trip. So day one was essentially a Friday. I came up on Thursday on a Jetstar A320. I have a little bit of credit spare with Jetstar since a lot of my flights in 2020 were cancelled. I'd already booked them, got cancelled, got credited, so actually still got another 2, maybe even 3 flights spare. I did go back on Rex Airlines on their 737, fairly new service, only started in the same month that I was up in Sydney. So I was one of their early adopting customers, you might say. So the first night, Friday, I went to the Sydney Opera House. Now, I went to the Sydney Opera House to watch an opera, funnily enough, and it was the opera Bluebeard's Castle. The Opera Australia Orchestra were advertising it as a piece that is rarely performed in Australia, and during one of those times I was sitting in the orchestra playing trumpet. That was back in 2003 with the Sydney Youth Orchestra, and we played it in the Verbrugen Hall at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music. The 2021 production was quite interesting. I took a friend of mine. I was going to take a few more friends, but one of them being Arjun actually, ended up being told that he had to fly, part of his job, and so that night he was up in Brisbane, I do believe. Anyway, I had a friend, Karen, who was a friend of mine from the Sydney Conservatorium of Music back in about 2003, 4, 5. When did we start? 2000. Yeah, that's right. 2003 to 2004. Very interesting production. Slightly different to the usual staging of the opera. Now, that said, sometimes the opera is not staged at all. It's just 2 characters. You can get away with just having them sing without any acting at all. But being the Sydney Opera, they went and put a production on. Pretty minimalist staging. Very interesting twist to the end. It's not the usual kind of thing to have a twist at the end of an opera unless it's normally part of the plot, but in this case they changed the plot without changing any words, just changing some of the actions. So what the opera usually has is 7 scenes. The two actors come on and they start singing in Hungarian. The opera usually puts on subtitles of some sort on a screen somewhere. So the first act is, well, each act is a door into the soul of the characters essentially. The first one is Bluebeard's castle's dungeon. The second one is his armory. Third one is his treasury. And then the garden, the kingdom, a lake, which turns out to be a lake of tears, and then the ending, which is the bit that they changed. So what normally happens is it's essentially like a Dracula kind of setting, or vampire. the Bluebeard character has a new wife who is very demanding of his secrets. She keeps asking him to open up the castle to show her what's happening behind all the doors. And in the beginning, the Bluebeard character is very reluctant to open these doors because he feels, embarrassed by what's there. Until they get to the garden, in which case he opens up quite almost violently and pushes her into opening up the kingdom door. And then once the kingdom door is opened, he's like gloating about how cool his kingdom is, until Judith pressures him to open up the next door, which is the Lake of Tears. And then he forbids her from opening up the final door ever, at which point quite a large chunk of opera happens, and then she somehow manages to get the key off him, opens the final door, inside which are his 3 former brides, and then he comes back and introduces them all to her, saying the first one is the bride of the morning, the second one is the bride of the noon, the third one is the bride of evening, and the fourth one he met at night. And of course then he describes how they met, and then describes her as the fourth bride, who is now the bride of midnight. Then they shut the door, and the 4 brides are either apparitions, ghosts, slaves to the castle, something like that. It's a very psychological horror kind of Hitchcockian opera. So the way that they changed the opera's plot without changing the words is, instead of having the women taken out by Bluebeard one by one, praised, and then Judith imprisoned forever in the castle, Judith inspires the other 3 brides to rise up, stab Bluebeard, and run off into the night. The words stay the same, but the implications are, instead of the women being in darkness forever now, Bluebeard is saying that darkness is around him for the rest of his life, which isn't going to be very long because he's dying. Twist. You don't normally get a twist in an opera that the plot has been settled in the 1800s. Well, 1920s in the case of this one. Anyway, that was the Sydney Opera House on the Friday. I stayed through for another few days, 5 days after that. On Saturday I went to the airport, met up with Arjun, who finally arrived back from Brisbane, having missed the opera, and left some spare seats. We watched the airplanes land, do the usual spotter thing. Later that afternoon I went and got a child seat for the back of the ute here, and I was going to use that to take a friend of mine who has a young child down to the Thirlmere Railway Museum. Thought that'd be fun. It was. And then finally at about 2 o'clock on Saturday I went and met up with a friend of mine who was in the City Youth Orchestra back in the day. Met her in 1998, and had lunch at the East Leagues Club to go to the Chooks. Sunday was the train ride, so I went out, picked up my friend and their kid, drove the nearly 2 hours to Thirlmere, went for a ride on the steam train, and that was quite fun. You can see some small video clips of that in the top left hand corner. So we rode on the train, we saw the train go up and down the line a couple of times, bought the child some Thomas the Tank Engine toys, and then came back home. Quite a tiring day, but quite enjoyable. Monday, had a bit of a sleep in, and went back to East Leagues Club for a trivia night that night. That was quite fun. I think we won a prize for the team. Of course, I don't live in Sydney anymore, so I donated that prize to the team. Here we are starting the Harbour Bridge run. Anyhow, that was Monday. On Tuesday I went down and met some of my work colleagues who work in Sydney. Usually speak to them on the phone. They're the supervisors for the technicians that I schedule, so we have a bit of back and forth on a daily basis. Saw their devastating meeting about the change of contract terms, which they're not very happy about. And yeah. Later on Tuesday, I met up with a friend of mine who went to the same high school as me, so we've known each other for quite a long time. Hadn't seen or had much to do with each other for far too long, and had a very wonderful meal out of the Moorebank Sports Club. Great food, I do recommend. Wednesday I met some other work colleagues. I'd never met them before, first time. Went up and had a coffee with them in Dundas before heading out to the City Metro train at Tallawong. Caught the train from Tallawong to Chatswood and back. Took a video of that, you've probably seen that already on the channel. And that's the driverless train, so I was able to get right up the front window as if we were driving the train, stick the camera right up there inside the window and get a really good view. After that I drove the Gulstan Gorge. Unfortunately the camera mount fell off while I was driving, so I didn't get a full shot of the Gulstan Gorge, but on the way to the Central Coast where I met up with Bryce, one of the that sim guys that we know up there at the Central Coast. Had dinner with him, drove back, and that was essentially the end of the trip. One more day with the parents, then off home on Rex Airlines. Here is a wonderful view of Sydney Opera House. Driving over the top of Circular Quay train station there. That building there's the toaster. Right, we're going to stick to the left-hand lane here. You can see the Botanical Gardens and Government House over there. A very small glimpse of the Sydney Conservatorium of Music just off to the left. Spent 2 years in that building. We spent 2 years while that building was being renovated when I was doing my degree. So we used to have to track out to Pitt Street and also the ATP at Redfern. We had different campuses all around Sydney while that building there was being renovated. Anyhow, just to end this video off, we're going to make a right hand turn here on Macquarie Street, named after Governor Macquarie, and at the end of that street is the Sydney Opera House. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the journey over from the north side, Chatswood to the Sydney Opera House, via the Sydney Harbour Bridge. The vehicle that we've been driving today is Dad's ute. It is a Mitsubishi Triton, double cab with a tray at the back. I'll put a transparency right up there in the left hand corner so you can see what it looks like. It's a white vehicle, all workings here. Alright, down the road that I've walked up and down many a time. Back in the old days when I was a university student at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music, some of my trumpet tutors were members of the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, so while most of the lessons were done in the building, there were occasions when I used to walk down and have a lesson in the green room of the Opera House. That was always fun. Also actual performances down here with the Sydney Youth Orchestra or sometimes the Conservatorium itself. And there is Sydney. And the Opera House car park is right there. And as we come back up the hill, we can see the Royal Botanical Gardens off to our left. All in all, I had great fun up in Sydney. It's a pity we had to spend a year locked away from the borders of the pandemic. But I'm glad to be back, and I'll hope to travel up here once again shortly. The Sydney Conservatorium of Music. Thanks for watching, and ciao for now.